The Richard Roeper Show is brought to you by AmericanEagle.com Studios. The digital landscape is changing rapidly, and to compete in today's online business environment, you need an experienced partner. Since 1995, AmericanEagle.com has partnered with companies of all sizes offering web design, web development, e-commerce, mobile apps, and digital marketing to drive your overall business's success because they believe that today's online world is your online opportunity. Visit AmericanEagle.com to get started today. Okay, guys, we're joining you in the middle of the week. Usually the podcast drops on a Friday. Most Fridays, you can get the podcast. We appreciate everyone listening. But I wanted to jump in as soon as possible and talk about the sad news that we've lost Robert Redford, one of the great actor, filmmaker, activist presences of all time in Hollywood. And we're going to talk about Mr. Redford's career as an actor, as a director, and, of course, the Sundance Institute and the Sundance Film Festival, all of the amazing accomplishments by Robert Redford. I'll start off with a little bit of this is from the Los Angeles Times. Nardine Saad wrote the obituary. Robert Redford, the iconic actor who starred in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and The Way We Were, died Tuesday at 89, the Oscar-winning director of Ordinary People. Transformed independent filmmaking through founding the Sundance Institute and Film Festival, and beyond Hollywood, championed environmental causes, received the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 2016. What a legacy, what a library of films, what a great, great body of work as kind of the original influencer of a kind in Hollywood, or really in Utah and Sundance, and an Oscar-winning director. I mean, incredible career. As the Los Angeles Times notes, long uncritical force in the elevation of independent filmmaking through the Sundance Institute. Redford died Tuesday morning at his home in Utah. As Newsweek put it, this is a good quote, what Redford has always captured best is the flawed American hero. And we're going to talk about that as we talk about his movies. I love this quote from the late, great director, Sidney Pollack, of course, who collaborated with Mr. Redford on a number of projects. And he said, Bob is a minimalist. He withholds, he never seduces his audience, but makes them come to him. And I think that is a real key when we talk about the career of Robert Redford, overlooked often as an actor when it came, time for nominations and trophies and awards and all that stuff, because people say, it's effortless for Bob Redford. He looks so great. And here's the thing, Robert Redford looked like the classic Hollywood leading man, really of the 40s and 50s, the middle of the century. And he came along at a time when that was still a traditional leading man, he and Paul Newman as well. But both Mr. Redford and Mr. Newman, what made them so great was that they would sometimes lean into their movie star good looks and sometimes play against it, and almost always play leading men who were deeply flawed and sometimes were on the other side of things, were anti-heroes and outlaws. So Robert Redford did some TV roles. In 1965, made his feature film debut with Inside Daisy Clover opposite Natalie Wood. And that was a Hollywood melodrama. Not the greatest film, although kind of an interesting piece, but also it kind of hinted at Robert Redford's ability and willingness to, I hate to use the term meta, but have a self-awareness about the way he looked and the type of career he could have had. So he's playing a movie star. And then he goes into an adaptation of Tennessee Williams with Natalie Wood, This Property is Condemned. Then goes the traditional classic star-making role, Barefoot in the Park with Jane Fonda, Neil Simon, Broadway hit. Very much, for 1967, where we had a lot of counterculture stuff going on, we were starting to get that, that wave of independent rebel films, and this was much of a throwback because you continued to see that in Hollywood through the 60s and 70s. There was still a place for the old-fashioned musicals and rom-coms and things like that. And then in 1969, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, obviously.
Kid, the next time I say let's go someplace like Bolivia, let's go someplace like Bolivia.
Next time. Ready?
No, we'll jump.
Like hell we will.
No, it'll be okay. If the water's deep enough, we don't get squished to death. They'll never follow us.
How do you know?
Would you make a jump like that and you didn't have to?
I have to, and I'm not gonna.
Well, we got to, otherwise we're dead. They're just gonna have to go back down the same way they come. Come on.
Just one clear shot, that's all I want.
Come on. We got to.
Nope. Get away from me.
Why?
I want to fight them.
They'll kill us.
Maybe.
You want to die?
Do you?
All right. I'll jump first.
Nope.
Then you jump first.
No, I said.
What's the matter with you?
I can't swim!
Why, are you crazy? The fall will probably kill you.
Love this film. We've often talked about how films inspired by historical events are almost pure fiction, and that was certainly the case with Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. But what a star-making vehicle! They were both stars already, but just a star vehicle for Redford and Newman. Wildly entertaining. Love that film. Let's go to the early 70s now. Here's where it gets really interesting to me too, because at this point, Robert Redford's one of the biggest movie stars in the world. He's a matinee idol. He's on the cover of all those, old-fashioned movie magazines and things like that. But even then, and always, if you think about it, you didn't see Bob Redford yucking it up a lot on the talk show circuit with Johnny Carson or doing all those kinds of, confessional interviews. He kept things close to the vest. He wanted his work to speak for itself. And at a time when he could have done anything he wanted in the early 70s, he does Jeremiah Johnson, which I don't know why became this huge meme or GIF or whatever you call it. The thing of him turning with the beard. That's Robert Redford's Jeremiah Johnson. But it's a beautiful film, and it's all about, as many of his films are about, different parts of American life and the American anti-hero and the American kind of solo individual who goes his own way. Jeremiah Johnson, if you haven't checked it out. Great film. And then one of my favorite political films of all time. I used to have this poster up at my on the wall of my office in the Sun-Times for years. The Candidate.
I think the time has come when the American people realize that we're in this together and that we sink or swim together. And I say to you, maybe, just maybe, that that's the way it should be. A test of our courage, of our compassion, our faith in ourselves, and our faith in our country.
And The Candidate, 1972, we talk about certain films that just hold up, and not just hold up, but seem, so far ahead of their time. And in The Candidate, if you haven't had a chance to see it, it's a great cast, a great story. So it won, actually, I think it won for Best Original Screenplay, I believe. So Robert Redford plays this idealistic lawyer. He's not necessarily known as a deep thinker. He comes from a legacy political family, and he's tapped to run for office. And it's all about how we get style over substance a lot there. And there's a great ending. I won't give it away, but a great ending where his character gives one of the great final lines in political movie history. Then he did The Way We Were with Barbra Streisand. And, it was a traditional romantic leading man role. But think about this. We're talking about a period of time right after The Way We Were. You had The Sting, one of the great caper movies of all time. I remember seeing that in a second run theater in Dalton. So I was probably 12 or 13 probably. And one of the great things about seeing movies back then was the chatter wasn't out there. So I had no idea about the big twist on top of the twist at the end. And the audience, I remember just bursting into applause at the end of The Sting. And then The Great Gatsby, which is kind of a hit and miss. Although if you go back and look at it, I don't know. We still haven't gotten a great adaptation of The Great Gatsby, but he is in a traditional movie star role. But we're still in the 70s here. So between 72 with Jeremiah Johnson and The Candidate, then The Way We Were in The Sting, both 1973, 74 with The Great Gatsby. Then we get 3 Days of the Condor. Robert Redford, he gets involved in this crazy CIA thriller. The next year, the best movie about journalism ever made, with All the President's Men. And there have been some great ones since then. Spotlight immediately comes to mind.
Excuse me, what is your name? I'm Bob Woodward of the Washington Post.
Markham.
Markham? Mr. Markham, are you here in connection with the Watergate burglary?
I'm not here.
But All the President's Men is one of those, if you talk about different genres and you say, you had a poll, what's the greatest movie about journalism ever made? All the President's Men is probably going to get 85% of the votes. With Redford playing Bob Woodward, of course, and Dustin Hoffman as Carl Bernstein, and almost in real time. All this stuff had just happened, a few years in the past. And it's amazing how this film, and it won 4 Oscars and probably should have won more. It's amazing how this film works as like a taut thriller, a mystery, even though we know exactly how it's going to turn out. And I love Redford, with the sleeves rolled up. And there's some great early scenes because Dustin Hoffman's Carl Bernstein was the more experienced journalist. Woodward was a local guy. And Bernstein's rewriting Woodward's copy and they're kind of clashing with each other. But, the result was one of the all-time great nonfiction books of all time and then one of the great fictional movies about journalism. And that's just the 70s. And that's not everything Robert Redford did. There were a lot of other, even The Electric Horseman, again, with Jane Fonda, a lot of fun, great entertainment. You get into the 80s. And of course, at this point, Robert Redford makes his directorial debut. He's somebody that had been involved, as a hands-on actor. And obviously, like a lot of great actors, observing and learning, and then comes out of the box with Ordinary People. And, I think Ordinary People sometimes gets unjustly slammed because it won 4 Academy Awards and Best Adapted Screenplay and Robert Redford Director and Best Picture, and then Timothy Hutton. And that was the year of Raging Bull. And whenever we talk about snubs and films that probably should have won and directors that probably should have won, I think almost everybody would say, yes, Raging Bull was a superior film. But that doesn't mean that Ordinary People wasn't a very, very strong, wrenching, heartfelt, deeply moving family drama, dark stuff in a lot of ways. But that started Redford's directorial career, and he continued on through. He'd like to do a lot of films about the American experience, and not always the best side of things. The Quiz Show scandal in 1994, he did The Quiz Show, Lions for Lambs, and The Company You Keep, and The Conspirator. Some historical drama with The Conspirator, and then you had these political thrillers that he liked to do. So his directorial career continued, through the years. But Redford did not slow down at all as an actor in the 80s. Brubaker, kind of old-fashioned prison drama, again, based on a true story, but really well done. And then a movie that I will defend forever as, if it's not the best baseball movie of all time, it's certainly the most romantic, and it's my favorite baseball movie, The Natural, in 1984. And yes, the book was changed, and yes, it's a fable, though. That's the thing. It's a fairy tale about baseball, and Redford was amazing as Roy Hobbs, and he played a little baseball, I think, in Colorado. So he even, he's playing an aging slugger, so his age, it was fine for him to be older. But you could tell when he threw and when he hit that he had some experience, and it drives me nuts when you have baseball movies where you don't have actors who can play the game. Out of Africa was a big, lush, kind of traditional Oscar-winning film. I think Out of Africa, so that was 85. So I was 25. I think that's the first movie I saw in a screening room with Roger Ebert. I was just coming up as a freelancer and just started at the Sun-Times, and Roger, of course, was already a legendary film critic. I think that's the first movie we actually saw at the Lake Street screening room in Chicago, was Out of Africa. And then you go through the 90s, and again, Redford would often play against his image and have fun with it. So you got something like, Indecent Proposal, which is not a good movie, but it was, in the 90s, that was the time for all of those lurid, glossy, highly charged, hot button issue movies like, Basic Instinct, and in the 80s too with Fatal Attraction and things like that. And Indecent Proposal was in that vein, but very entertaining. And then through the 2000s and the 2010s, we mentioned Lions for Lambs and The Company You Keep, that Robert Redford directed. All Is Lost is a film. I went back and I looked at it. I think I gave it 4 stars for the Sun-Times. That's, believe it or not, geez, that's 12 years ago, 2013. That's the survival film where Robert Redford is alone at sea, almost no dialogue. Got him a Golden Globe nomination. One of his finest career performances, and even though there's not a lot of dialogue, and that's the thing, he had some speeches in some movies, but not like a lot of the actors that we think of with over-the-top, brilliant, screen, commanding performances. He was a great reactor. I mentioned the Pollock quote about letting the audiences come to him, and always was willing to share the screen with actors who were his equal, or he would probably tell you in pure technique, his superior, and it would just make him better. And we even got him in Captain America, the Winter Soldier, and all the way up to The Old Man and the Gun, which was based on a real life story about these, geriatric bank robbers. And he was terrific in The Old Man and the Gun. So the acting with Robert Redford for me was just something to behold. I mean, I mentioned probably a dozen films there, and there are at least 20 more worth your time. You could have a Robert Redford Film Festival in a number of genres, and certainly that could, span the decades, and it could last a week. So I'm just so grateful for the chance to see so many of those films over the years and sometimes write and talk about them. Why don't we take a break real fast? And we're going to talk a little bit more about Mr. Redford's legacy with Sundance. And I'll tell you a little bit about the time I had dinner with him as well. All right, let's talk about Portillo's. Now, they, of course, are known for their famous Chicago hot dogs with all the freshest and tastiest ingredients, right down to that poppy seed bun. And then, of course, there's the legendary chocolate cake. If you're hearing this right now, that means you are alive and near a computer. That's all you got to be. That's all you need to go to Portillos.com and check out their entire selection of stuff you can get anywhere in these United States of America. Now, if you're blessed enough to live near a Portillo's, then you don't have to worry about getting online. Just go to the store, get the hot dogs, get the Italian beef, the salads, the chicken. They got it great. And then, of course, the chocolate cake, the single greatest item of all chocolate cake items in the history of humanity. You think I'm overstating that? I am not. Go and find out yourself. Go to the store, order online. Unbelievable, the chocolate cake. And they even have a cake shake. They take the cake, they smoosh it into a can with some super cool ingredients. I don't know. They do a bunch of stuff. There's ice cream. And all of a sudden you got a chocolate cake shake. When it comes out of the blender, it's the best. It is a unique dining experience every time. Go to Portillos.com. Find a location near you. You can order online. Portillos. Portillos.com.
And I don't believe any of us are too successful or too accomplished ever to not be able to learn something new. The more humble you can stay, the more likely the process will remain okay.
Okay, I had the privilege of talking to Mr. Redford, Robert Redford, a couple of times over the years, and thought I'd share this with you. I went back and looked at the notes for this, which I've kept over the years in a lot of files and archives and things like that. So I will tell you this, guys. The best bottle of wine I ever had in my life was a bottle of red wine I had in January of 2004. Now, I cannot tell you anything more about that wine other than it was red wine, and there might have been a second bottle of red wine involved, but the reason it's the best bottle of wine I ever had in my life, and yes, this is what the kids call a humble brag, or I think it's just a brag, it's because I shared that wine with Robert Redford. I had a chance to have a dinner with him at the Sundance Film Festival. I think he was promoting a movie called The Clearing, which, interestingly enough, he hadn't appeared in any Sundance movies up until that point, even though he had been part of the Sundance Institute and the film festival since the beginning, of course, and named after Sundance, his character in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. But this was just an informal, off-the-record dinner. And there were a few other great actors there, but I was seated right across from it. It was so cool, and we were really having a great time. And he really kind of opened up, just like the wine, if you will. And we just talked about life and movies. And I remember him telling me how much he loved Chicago, my hometown. Obviously, we talked about where we're from and all that kind of basic, dinner party stuff. And he told me that he had often thought about living in Chicago if he could have worked it out, and that he had spent 3 different times. Robert Redford had spent a lot of time in Chicago. The first was with The Sting. Although much of that was filmed on back lots, but there were some scenes shot in Chicago. So he was in Chicago with The Sting. Then, of course, shooting Ordinary People in Chicago and in Lake Forest and the North Shore. So, spent months developing the film. So I always remembered him talking about Chicago and his love for the city at that amazing dinner we had in Sundance. God, 21 years ago. Can you believe that? Holy shit. So the Sundance Film Festival, obviously, the name, the Sundance Film Festival. But what I think is very interesting about this, and this speaks to Robert Redford fairly early on. He's already a major star, but wanting to be involved in filmmaking and helping other aspiring writers and directors and actors through the Sundance Institute. They called it it was actually the Utah U.S. Film Festival in the late 70s, and There were other people, John Earl, I know, and Sterling Van Wagenen, who were founding that. And then the Institute came along with Robert Redford in 1981. So this was at his own retreat in Utah, and it was all about filmmakers' labs and workshopping films. And sometimes they would even shoot, short versions of films that would become famous and hone scripts. And that's where we got, films like Reservoir Dogs, for example, was workshopped at the director's lab and then premiered at Sundance. That's 92. So that was right around the time where there was this breakout era of the Sundance Film Festival in the 90s and then through the 2000s, where almost every year there would be huge buzz about a film that was coming out. And often these were films that either workshopped in labs or premiered there, or both. So Boys Don't Cry, Requiem for a Dream, Half Nelson, Fruitville Station, all the way up to 2013. All of those were developed or workshopped at various labs. And the Institute still runs all these labs, directors, screenwriters, producers, all different types of things to, encourage the filmmaking process. And, and Sundance is still obviously a huge thing, but it was so cool back in the day, to just see every year, is it going to be Sex, Lies, and Videotape? We mentioned Reservoir Dogs, Clerks, Kevin Smith, Little Miss Sunshine, through the years, all the way through the 2010s and films like Winter's Bone and Whiplash. They were either workshopped there or made huge splashes there, and then they'd win big prizes there. I remember seeing Memento there, Christopher and Jonathan Nolan, and sitting with them and seeing that, make this huge splash. So many films and so many filmmakers owe so much to Sundance. And as I mentioned at the top too, in terms of Mr. Redford's legacy, such a champion of the environment. And you'd see that, of course, in films like A River Runs Through It. And that's an important part of his legacy as well. So, every great actor, filmmaker, writer, figure, storyteller has their own path. And you have to figure out the best way to nurture your talents and develop it. If you're lucky enough and talented enough to become a big star, it's lightning in a bottle. But I would say that Robert Redford's career and what he did with his movie stardom is a blueprint for anyone to follow and all of us to admire, because here was a man who could have just glided through life and been a great leading man and done an occasional vanity project and just lived his life and chose instead to make important films, to do movies that, captured different parts of American history and different parts of, if you will, the zeitgeist, and also to then become a filmmaker and tell stories worth telling, and to be such a champion for young filmmakers and directors and writers, and also to lend his name to important causes. I mean, that's all of it, right? That's everything and more. So Robert Redford, we lost him at the age of 89. We were lucky to have him for so many years and decades. And this happens. I know it's always kind of a strange thing, but I think kind of a cool thing whenever anybody dies in the music world or the movie world or any entertainment genre. People are, all of a sudden you'll see their films, trending on Netflix, or if it's physical media, it's number one, or if it's music, an old song will rise to the top of the charts. And I always just think, well, that's kind of odd, but I've come to really embrace that, because what it really means is people are like, oh my gosh, even someone who like Robert Redford, who's been around for a long time and lived a full life, it's still a tremendous loss. And what better way to remember and celebrate and pay tribute to an artist than by revisiting some of their best work? So I hope you do that. I know I will. Thanks for listening. This is The Richard Roeper Show.